The Chinook helicopter shuddered violently as it descended through Afghanistan's night sky, its twin rotors beating the thin mountain air into submission. Maya Reeves pressed her back against the vibrating metal hull, her M110 sniper rifle clutched between her knees, and tried to control the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Through the open rear door, she could see nothing but darkness punctuated by the occasional spark of tracer fire in the distant mountains, a reminder that this wasn't a training exercise anymore. At 24 years old, Maya was the youngest member of her National Guard unit and the only woman. More specifically, she was the only female sniper in the entire battalion, a distinction that had earned her nothing but contempt since the day she qualified. The other soldiers sat in silence around her, their faces hidden behind night vision goggles and tactical gear, but she could feel their resentment like heat radiating from a fire. They didn't want her here. They'd made that abundantly clear. Sergeant First Class Robert Dawson sat directly across from her, his weathered face illuminated by the red glow of the cabin lights. He was a career soldier, 38 years old, with 2 previous deployments to Iraq and a chest full of ribbons that spoke to his experience. He hadn't looked at Maya once during the entire flight from Bagram Airfield. He didn't need to. His opinion of her had been crystallized 3 months ago during their pre-deployment training at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. "You'll get someone killed," he'd told her flatly after she'd struggled through a 20-mile ruck march, arriving 30 minutes behind the rest of the squad. "This isn't about being fair or progressive or whatever political bullshit got you through sniper school. This is about combat effectiveness, and you, Reeves, are not combat effective." Maya had wanted to defend herself, to point out that she'd graduated in the top 15% of her sniper class, that her marksmanship scores were higher than half the men in their unit, that she'd qualified expert on every weapon system they'd trained on. But she'd stayed silent, swallowing the words like bitter medicine. Speaking up would only make things worse. It always did. The nickname had started a week later, Anchor, as in, the thing that drags a ship down. Corporal Eddie Martinez had coined it during a particularly brutal training exercise in the Wisconsin hills. Maya had slipped on loose gravel during a tactical movement, and her 50-pound pack had sent her tumbling down a steep embankment. It had taken 3 soldiers to pull her back up, wasting precious minutes and compromising their training objective. "Nice going, Anchor," Martinez had muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Way to drag us all down with you." The name had stuck. Within days, the entire squad was using it, not to her face. They weren't quite that openly insubordinate, but in the barracks during chow, whenever they thought she couldn't hear. Maya heard it anyway. She heard everything. The worst part wasn't the nickname. It was the isolation. During their 3 months of pre-deployment training, she'd been systematically excluded from everything that mattered. Tactical planning sessions happened without her. The squad would grab meals together and somehow forget to mention it. When they went into town for downtime, her invitation was always accidentally overlooked. She existed in a bubble of enforced solitude, surrounded by people but utterly alone. Dawson had made it worse by assigning her every degrading task he could justify. She pulled the longest guard shifts. She carried the heaviest equipment. She cleaned the latrines more than anyone else. And through it all, she was expected to maintain the same performance standards as everyone else, despite being set up to fail at every turn. Now, as the Chinook dropped altitude toward Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Maya felt the weight of everything pressing down on her, the pack on her back, the rifle in her hands, the expectations she could never meet, the contempt she couldn't escape. The thought of spending the next 12 months in this environment felt suffocating. The crew chief held up 5 fingers, 5 minutes to landing. Around her, the soldiers began their final checks, adjusting gear, securing weapons, preparing for the transition from the relative safety of the air to the very real dangers of the ground. Maya did the same, her movements automatic after months of training. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she'd saved as her lock screen. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Reeves, stood in his Marine Corps dress blues, his face young and proud, his hand resting on 12-year-old Maya's shoulder as she held her first rifle. They were at the range in rural Ohio where he'd taught her to shoot, where she discovered the one thing she was truly, naturally gifted at. He'd died of cancer when she was 16, but his words had never left her. "Anyone can quit, Maya," he'd told her a week before he passed, his body ravaged by disease but his spirit still Marine strong. "Quitting is the easiest thing in the world. But heroes reload. They take another shot. They keep fighting even when everything tells them to stop." The Chinook's wheels hit the ground hard, jolting Maya back to reality. The rear ramp dropped, and a wall of dust and heat rushed in, carrying with it the smell of jet fuel and burning trash. Dawson was the first out, moving with the confidence of a man who'd done this before. The others followed in a disciplined line. Maya was last, always last. As her boots hit Afghan soil for the first time, she made a silent promise to her father's memory. She wouldn't quit. She wouldn't give Dawson or Martinez or any of them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd prove them wrong or she'd die trying. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 3 weeks, everything would change. In 3 weeks, Maya Reeves would make a shot that would save them all and rewrite every assumption they'd ever made about her. But first, she had to survive being Anchor. Briefing room at Forward Operating Base Phoenix was a converted shipping container with a struggling air conditioning unit and maps plastered across every surface. 20 soldiers crammed into the metal box at 600 hours, the morning sun already turning the space into an oven. Maya stood in the back corner, as always, her notepad open but her pen still. Nobody wanted to see her taking notes. Nobody wanted her input. Major William Chen stood at the front, his desert camouflage uniform dark with sweat despite the early hour. Behind him, a large tactical map showed the terrain between FOB Phoenix and Forward Operating Base Keating, 53 kilometers of some of the most dangerous roads in Afghanistan. Red pushpins marked previous attack sites. There were a lot of red pushpins. "Gentlemen," Chen began, then caught himself with an awkward glance at Maya. "And Corporal Reeves, we have a high-priority supply run that needs to move through Tangi Valley within the next 48 hours. FOB Keating is critically low on ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Without resupply, they'll be combat ineffective within a week." A murmur rippled through the assembled soldiers. Everyone knew about Tangi Valley. 3 convoys in the last 4 months, 3 ambushes, 14 casualties. Sergeant Dawson raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, Tangi Valley is a meat grinder. Intel has been wrong on that route more times than I can count. What makes this run any different?" Chen nodded, acknowledging the concern. "I understand your hesitation, Sergeant, but current intelligence from ISR surveillance and local informants suggests Taliban activity in the region has decreased significantly over the past 2 weeks. They've shifted resources north toward Kunar province. The brass believes we have a window of opportunity here." Maya's eyes went to the map. Even from the back of the room, she could read the terrain features clearly. The route wound through relatively flat desert for the first 30 kilometers, then entered the valley system, a narrow corridor flanked by ridgelines that rose 300 to 500 meters on either side. At kilometer marker 41, the road squeezed through an especially tight pass where the valley walls closed to less than 200 meters apart. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a lesson from countless afternoons studying military history in their Ohio basement. "Never trust a narrow pass, Maya. If I wanted to kill a convoy, that's exactly where I'd do it. Elevation, limited escape routes, controlled access. It's an ambush waiting to happen." She studied the topographical lines around that choke point. The eastern ridge had a slight plateau approximately 800 meters from the road, perfect for a command position. The western ridge had natural defilade positions every 50 meters, ideal for layered machine gun fire. If she were planning an ambush, she'd hit them right there, right at that pass. It was textbook. Maya raised her hand. Chen looked surprised. Yes, Corporal Reeves. Sir, I have concerns about the terrain at kilometer 41. She stepped forward, pointing at the map. That choke point has all the characteristics of a classic L-shaped ambush site. Limited maneuverability, elevated firing positions on both flanks, single-lane road with no alternate routes. If intel is wrong about decreased Taliban activity. Intel isn't wrong, Corporal, Lieutenant Bradshaw interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. He was 26, fresh out of West Point, and made no secret of his belief that women didn't belong in combat roles. We have drone coverage, SIGINT intercepts, and human intelligence all confirming the same thing. The Taliban have moved their forces north. But sir, this is exactly the kind of route where... Reeves, Dawson's voice cut through the room like a blade. The adults are talking, stand down. Laughter rippled through some of the younger soldiers. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks but forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional would only prove their point. Chen cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Thank you for your input, Corporal. Your concerns are noted. However, based on current intelligence assessments, we're proceeding with the mission. He turned back to the map. Here's the convoy composition. 4 vehicles, 2 MRAPs, 1 supply truck, 1 Humvee. Sergeant Dawson will command from the lead MRAP. Lieutenant Bradshaw will take the trail vehicle. Dawson studied the map, his jaw tight. Despite his dismissal of Maya, she could see he shared her concerns. He'd been in combat long enough to know that decreased enemy activity often meant the enemy was planning something big. Sir, I want my best shooters in overlapping positions, Dawson said. Martinez and Cooper in lead vehicle, Jackson and Williams in trail. We need maximum firepower covering all angles. Agreed, Chen said, and Corporal Reeves. Dawson didn't hesitate. Rear vehicle, sir, supply truck. The safest position, the one least likely to see action. The implication was clear. Keep her out of the way where she can't screw anything up. Maya bit her tongue. She'd learned not to argue about assignments. It never changed anything and only made her look difficult. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes. Radio frequencies, medevac protocols, rules of engagement, contingency plans. Maya took notes dutifully, aware that several soldiers were watching her with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. To them, she was still anchor, still dead weight, still the liability they'd been forced to accept. As the briefing concluded and soldiers filed out into the blazing Afghan morning, Corporal Martinez sidled up next to her. Hey, anchor, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. Try not to slow us down tomorrow, okay? Some of us would like to come back alive. He walked away before she could respond. Maya stood alone in the empty briefing room, staring at the map. At that choke point at kilometer 41. At the red pushpins marking where other convoys had been hit. At the terrain that screamed ambush to anyone with eyes to see it. Tomorrow they'd roll out at dawn. 20 soldiers in 4 vehicles, heading into a valley that had already swallowed 14 American lives. And everyone, from Major Chen down to the lowest private, believed intel that said the threat was minimal. Everyone except Maya. She reached out and touched the map at kilometer marker 41, her finger tracing the narrow pass between those ridgelines. I hope I'm wrong, she whispered to the empty room. God, I hope I'm wrong. But deep in her gut, she knew she wasn't. Tomorrow, in that valley, one of 2 things would happen. Either intel would prove correct and they'd complete an uneventful supply run, or Maya's worst fears would come true, and she'd finally get a chance to prove she wasn't dead weight after all. She just hoped that chance wouldn't cost anyone their life. Dawn broke over the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of orange and gold, beautiful and deceptive. Maya sat in the back of the supply truck, her M110 sniper rifle across her lap, watching the landscape roll past through the canvas opening. They'd been on the road for 90 minutes, and so far everything had been quiet. Too quiet. The convoy moved in standard tactical formation. Dawson's MRAP in front, the lumbering supply truck in the middle where Maya rode with Specialist Chen and Private First Class Rodriguez, and Lieutenant Bradshaw's Humvee trailing behind. The fourth vehicle, another MRAP, held the reserve team. Maya's radio crackled with routine traffic. "Lead vehicle, this is trail. No contact, all clear on our 6. Copy that, trail. Maintain spacing." They were 40 kilometers in now, approaching the valley system. The flat desert terrain had given way to rolling hills that gradually steepened into the mountains. Maya felt her pulse quickening. 11 more kilometers to the choke point. The place she'd warned them about. The place no one had listened. "You okay back there, Corporal?" Rodriguez asked. He was 19 from Texas and one of the few soldiers who'd never been outright cruel to her. He just ignored her, which felt like kindness by comparison. "Fine," Maya said, checking her rifle for the 10th time that morning. Magazine seated, chamber clear, scope covers off. She'd be ready if when something happened. "You seem jumpy." "Just alert, like we should be." Chen snorted from the driver's seat. "Relax, Reeves. Intel says this route is clear. We'll be at Keating in 2 hours, drop this stuff off and be back for lunch." Maya didn't respond. She'd learned not to argue with optimism. People heard what they wanted to hear. The convoy entered the valley proper at kilometer 38. The landscape changed dramatically, walls of rock and dirt rising on either side, the road narrowing to a single lane carved into the mountainside. Maya's throat tightened. This was it, the approach to the kill zone. She keyed her radio. "Lead, this is Reeves. Entering the choke point area. Recommend increased vigilance." A pause, then Dawson's voice clipped and annoyed. "Copy, Reeves. We're all awake up here. Maintain radio discipline." Maya gritted her teeth. She scanned the ridgelines through her scope, searching for any sign of movement, any glint of metal, any disturbance in the natural patterns of rock and vegetation. Nothing. Maybe Intel was right. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe. The world exploded. The IED detonated under Dawson's MRAP with a sound that Maya felt in her bones before she heard it. A massive geyser of dirt and flame erupted, flipping the 20-ton vehicle like a child's toy. The blast wave hit the supply truck a heartbeat later, slamming Maya against the metal side wall hard enough to see stars. "Contact, contact, IED," someone screamed over the radio. Then the machine guns opened up. Fire poured down from both ridgelines in a coordinated symphony of death. PKM machine guns, AK-47s, and the distinctive crack of SVD sniper rifles. The Taliban had been waiting. They'd been waiting the whole time. The supply truck's windshield shattered as bullets punched through. Chen slumped forward, blood spraying across the dashboard. Rodriguez was screaming, hit or just terrified, Maya couldn't tell. The truck swerved wildly, nearly going off the road before Rodriguez grabbed the wheel. "Get us out of here," Maya shouted, but there was nowhere to go. They were boxed in, burning MRAP in front, steep drop-off to the right, sheer cliff wall to the left, and Bradshaw's Humvee blocking retreat from behind. Perfect L-shaped ambush, exactly what she'd warned them about. An RPG streaked across the sky, leaving a smoke trail like a finger pointing at death. It slammed into the trail MRAP with a thunderous explosion. The vehicle erupted in flames, men stumbling out, some on fire, all of them screaming. Maya's training kicked in, overriding her fear. She grabbed her rifle and rolled out of the truck, hitting the ground hard and scrambling for cover behind the rear wheel. Bullets stitched the dirt around her, kicking up geysers of dust and stone fragments. The radio had dissolved into chaos, multiple voices shouting over each other. 3 men down in lead vehicle. Taking fire from the eastern ridge. Can't get a fix on their position. Bradshaw is hit, Bradshaw is hit. Where's our air support? Dawson's voice cut through, strained but steady. All units return fire, suppress those ridgelines, get those wounded to cover. Maya pressed herself against the truck's massive tire, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. This was real. This was actually happening. People were dying around her. The acrid smell of burning metal and diesel fuel mixed with cordite and something else, something organic and terrible that she didn't want to identify. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to be a soldier instead of a terrified girl from Ohio. Slowly, Maya raised her head and brought her scope up to scan the eastern ridgeline. The Taliban fire was devastating but not random. Someone was coordinating it. There, at 800 meters, on that plateau she'd identified on the map. A figure in gray robes, holding a radio, making hand signals to fighters positioned along the ridge. The commander, the man running this whole ambush. A burst of machine gun fire sparked off the truck inches from Maya's head, forcing her back down. Her hands were shaking. This was nothing like training, nothing like qualification courses with paper targets and safety officers. This was chaos and blood and death, and she was in the middle of it. "Reeves," Dawson's voice over the radio, desperate now. "Where's your covering fire? We need suppression on that eastern ridge." Maya's mind raced. She could spray bullets like everyone else, add to the noise and fury without actually changing anything. Or she could do what she'd been trained to do, what her father had taught her to do. Make the shot that matters. She looked through her scope again at the Taliban commander, calculating in her head. 800 meters, uphill, wind from the west at maybe 12 miles per hour, target partially concealed and moving. Temperature affecting ballistics, her own elevated heart rate affecting stability. Impossible shot, absolutely impossible under these conditions. But that man was killing her friends. That man had planned this ambush. That man was the reason Dawson's MRAP was burning, the reason Chen was dead in the driver's seat, the reason 3 wounded soldiers were bleeding out in the kill zone. Maya pulled back the charging handle, chambering around. Her hands had stopped shaking. In the midst of hell, she found the cold, still place her father had taught her to access. The place where fear couldn't reach. The place where there was only the rifle, the target, and the shot. Anchor, they'd called her, dead weight. Time to prove them wrong. Maya's world contracted to the circle of her scope. 800 meters of Afghan air, dust, and death separated her from the man in gray robes. Through the loophole optic, she could see him clearly now, older, maybe 50, with a thick black beard streaked with gray. He was gesturing with his left hand, directing fighters like a conductor leading an orchestra of violence. His radio was in his right hand. Another RPG screamed overhead, impacting somewhere behind her with a boom that shook her teeth. Someone was screaming for a medic. The staccato bark of machine gun fire was constant now, overlapping from multiple positions. The Taliban had turned this narrow pass into a killing floor, and Maya's unit was bleeding out on it. Her finger rested on the trigger, but she didn't squeeze. Not yet. Rushing the shot would waste it, and she'd only get one chance before he moved to cover or she took fire that made the shot impossible. "All units, we need immediate air support," Dawson's voice cracked over the radio. "Multiple casualties. Grid November Delta 476283, how copy?" The response was broken by static. "Apache are 15 minutes out. Repeat, 15 minutes." 15 minutes. They'd all be dead in 15 minutes. Maya's breathing slowed, deliberately, mechanically. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 4. It was a technique her father had drilled into her thousands of times at the range in Ohio, where the most dangerous thing had been the mosquitoes, and the worst consequence of a miss was having to walk downrange to check the target. This was different. This miss would cost lives. She calculated the shot parameters in her head with the speed of long practice. Range, 800 meters confirmed by her laser rangefinder. Elevation, approximately 200 meters higher than her position. Wind, gusting 12 to 15 miles per hour from the west, quartering slightly. Temperature, already 95 degrees, affecting air density and bullet trajectory. The M110 rifle chambered 7.62 times 51 NATO rounds with a muzzle velocity of 2,580 feet per second. At this range and elevation, she needed to compensate for approximately 32 inches of bullet drop and another 8 inches of wind drift. But the target wasn't stationary. He was moving, gesturing, turning. She'd have to lead him, anticipate his movement. Mathematically, the probability of success was less than 20%. And that was for a shooter in controlled conditions, not pinned down in an active firefight with adrenaline screaming through their veins. "Reeves, where the hell is your fire?" Dawson again, desperate. Maya blocked him out. She blocked out everything, the explosions, the screaming, the bullets snapping through the air close enough to feel. She found that quiet place inside herself, the place where her father lived in memory, his hand steady on her shoulder, his voice calm in her ear. When everything's chaos, Maya, you become the calm. When everyone's shooting wild, you take the aimed shot. That's what separates snipers from everyone else. We don't react, we respond, and we don't miss when it matters. Through her scope, the Taliban commander turned slightly, presenting his left side. He was speaking into the radio now, probably coordinating the next phase of the ambush, maybe calling in more fighters, maybe ordering them to move down from the ridgelines and finish off the survivors. Maya made her final adjustments, elevated the muzzle to compensate for drop, shifted the crosshairs 8 inches right to account for wind, led the target by a body width to anticipate his movement. Her heart rate had dropped to 60 beats per minute. Her hands were rock steady. The chaos around her had faded to a distant murmur, like a TV playing in another room. She exhaled half a breath and held it. The crosshairs settled on the center mass of the gray-robed figure. Her finger squeezed the trigger with the pressure of 4.5 pounds. Not a jerk, not a pull, just a steady, inevitable increase until the trigger broke and the rifle fired. The shot cracked across the valley, lost instantly in the cacophony of battle. Through the scope, Maya watched the bullet's flight with the strange time dilation that happens in moments of extreme focus. It seemed to take forever and no time at all. The Taliban commander jerked backward, the radio falling from his hand. His body crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, tumbling off the plateau and down the rocky slope. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. The machine guns kept firing, RPGs kept flying, men kept dying. Then confusion rippled through the Taliban positions like a wave. The coordinated fire began to stutter. Fighters looked around, seeking orders that weren't coming. The symphony of violence lost its conductor. Maya didn't celebrate. She was already finding her next target. 600 meters western ridge. Machine gunner behind a PKM, pouring fire into Dawson's position. She could see the muzzle flash, the brass casings ejecting, the way he traversed the barrel back and forth. Adjust for range, adjust for wind, lead the target. Breathe, hold, squeeze. The machine gunner pitched forward over his weapon and went still. 750 meters eastern ridge. RPG team loading another rocket. 2 men, one holding the launcher, one feeding the round. She took the shooter first. The loader dropped the rocket and ran. 820 meters, northern position. A spotter with binoculars, directing fire from a concealed position behind a boulder cluster. This shot was harder, only his head and shoulders visible. Maya compensated for the increased elevation, the greater wind drift at the extended range. Breathe, hold, squeeze. The spotter disappeared behind the boulder and didn't reappear. 4 shots, 4 targets, 4 kills in less than 2 minutes. The Taliban ambush was fragmenting. Without coordination, the fighters were reverting to independent action, some continuing to shoot, others withdrawing to better positions, a few beginning to flee. The disciplined L-shaped ambush was becoming a chaotic firefight, and that chaos favored the Americans. Dawson's voice cut through the radio, different now, harder, focused. All units, enemy coordination is broken. Martinez, Cooper, suppress that western ridge. Jackson, Williams, cover the wounded. We're getting our people out of the kill zone. The American response intensified. Freed from the coordinated crossfire, soldiers could maneuver. They laid down covering fire, pulled wounded comrades to safety behind the disabled vehicles, established defensive positions. Maya kept shooting. Another machine gun position. A fighter moving between rocks. A muzzle flash from a concealed position. She became the angel of death on that ridgeline, methodically eliminating threats with the cold precision her father had spent years teaching her. The distinctive roar of Apache helicopters echoed through the valley, still minutes away but close enough to hear. The Taliban knew what that sound meant. The ambush was over. Through her scope, Maya watched the enemy fighters retreat, scrambling up the ridgelines and melting into the mountains. A few diehards kept shooting, but their fire was scattered, desperate. She found one more target, a fighter with an RPG, lining up a shot on the burning MRAP where wounded soldiers had taken cover. Range 900 meters, nearly the effective limit of her rifle. Maya didn't hesitate. She made the adjustments automatically, muscle memory and mathematics combining into lethal geometry. The fighter with the RPG fell backward, the rocket firing wild into the sky. "Cease fire," Dawson's voice. "They're breaking contact." Maya lowered her rifle, her hands shaking now that the shooting had stopped. The scope had protected her from seeing faces clearly during the engagement, but now, looking at the ridgelines with her naked eyes, she could see the bodies, could see what she'd done. A hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. Dawson stood there, his face black with soot and blood, his eyes wild. For a moment, Maya thought he was going to hit her. Instead, he pulled her into a crushing hug. "You magnificent badass," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved us. You saved all of us." Maya couldn't speak. She just stood there, holding her rifle, listening to the wounded crying for medics, watching smoke rise from burning vehicles, and wondering how she'd become a killer in the space of 5 minutes. But she'd proven one thing beyond any doubt. She wasn't dead weight. She was the reason they were still alive. The Apache helicopters arrived like avenging angels, their rotors beating the air into submission as they screamed over the ridgeline at 200 feet. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the radio, calm and professional despite the carnage below. "Havoc 1-6, this is Guardian 2-3. We have eyes on multiple enemy positions. Request clearance to engage." "Guardian 2-3, you are cleared hot," Dawson shouted into his radio, still gripping Maya's shoulder. "Light them up." The 30 chain guns opened fire with a sound like the world tearing apart. Rounds chewed into the ridgelines where Taliban fighters were still entrenched, sending up geysers of pulverized rock and dirt. A Hellfire missile streaked from the Apache's wing, impacting a machine gun nest on the eastern ridge with devastating precision. The explosion sent debris tumbling down the mountainside. The remaining Taliban fighters broke completely. Through her scope, Maya watched them scatter like startled insects, abandoning weapons and equipment as they fled into the deeper mountains. A few tried to return fire with small arms, but it was futile, like throwing stones at a hurricane. "All enemy positions are neutralized or retreating," the Apache pilot reported. "We'll maintain overwatch while you consolidate." Dawson released Maya and turned to survey the devastation. The kill zone looked like something from a nightmare. His lead MRAP was still burning, black smoke pouring into the clear morning sky. The trail MRAP was a twisted wreck, its armor plating peeled back by the RPG impact. Bodies and equipment were scattered across the road. The supply truck Maya had been riding in was riddled with bullet holes, its windshield gone, Chen's body still slumped in the driver's seat. "Medic, we need medics here," someone shouted. The call was taken up by multiple voices, creating a desperate chorus. Specialist Rodriguez was applying a tourniquet to Private Williams, whose leg was bleeding badly. Corporal Martinez dragged a wounded soldier behind the cover of the burning MRAP, his own face covered in blood from a shrapnel wound. Lieutenant Bradshaw sat against a rock, conscious but dazed, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Dawson keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the chaos. "All units sound off. I need a casualty count and status report. Lead vehicle first." "Lead here, 3 wounded, 1 critical." Donnelly took shrapnel to the chest, not responding. "Harris and Thompson are ambulatory." "Trail vehicle." "Trail here, 4 wounded, all stable. Vehicle is combat ineffective." "Supply truck." Maya grabbed the radio from her vest. "Supply here, 1 KIA Specialist Chen. Rodriguez and I are green." Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. She didn't feel steady. She felt like she was barely holding herself together with wire and willpower. "Copy all." Dawson paused, doing the math. "Total casualties, 1 KIA, 7 wounded, 3 critical. Guardian 2-3, we need immediate medevac for critical patients." "Roger that, Havoc. Dust-off birds are inbound, ETA 6 minutes." 6 minutes? Could the critically wounded last 6 minutes? Maya forced herself to move, to stop standing there like a statue and actually help. She slung her rifle and ran to the nearest casualty, Private Donnelly, the one Dawson had called critical. He was young, maybe 20, with a baby face that made him look even younger. The shrapnel had torn through his body armor and into his chest. He was conscious but struggling to breathe, each inhalation producing a wet, sucking sound that made Maya's stomach turn. "Stay with me, Donnelly," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. She'd had combat medical training, but this was beyond anything they'd practiced on rubber dummies. This was real blood, real pain, real death staring her in the face. She pressed a chest seal over the wound, her hand slick with his blood. Donnelly's eyes found hers, wide and terrified. "Am I gonna die?" he gasped. Maya wanted to lie, to tell him he'd be fine, but something in his eyes demanded honesty. "Not if I can help it," she said instead. "But you need to fight, Donnelly. Stay conscious. Keep breathing. The helicopter is almost here." "My mom," he coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Tell my mom." "You'll tell her yourself when you get home," Maya interrupted firmly. "Stay with me. That's an order, Private." The absurdity of her, Corporal Anchor Reeves, the unit's dead weight, giving orders to anyone should have been laughable. But Donnelly nodded weakly and focused on breathing. Around them, the other soldiers worked frantically to stabilize the wounded. The Apache helicopters circled overhead like protective hawks, their guns trained on the ridgelines in case any Taliban fighters got brave or stupid. The valley that had been a chaos of gunfire and explosions 3 minutes ago was now eerily quiet except for the sounds of men in pain and the approaching thump of medevac rotors. Dawson appeared beside Maya, his own trauma kit open. "Good work on that chest seal," he said, checking Donnelly's vitals. "You might have just saved his life." "I just did what I was trained to do," Maya replied, not looking at him, keeping her focus on Donnelly. "No," Dawson's hand gripped her shoulder again, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You did a hell of a lot more than that." His face was serious, stripped of the contempt and dismissal she'd grown accustomed to seeing there. "Those shots you made, I was watching through my scope after the first one. 800 meters on a moving target in the middle of a firefight. Then you kept shooting, kept eliminating threats. You broke that ambush, Reeves. You saved this entire unit." Maya wanted to feel pride, but all she felt was numb. "I'm just glad I didn't miss." Most snipers would have missed. Hell, most snipers wouldn't have even attempted those shots. Dawson shook his head in something like wonder. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. And I'm sorry for every goddamn thing I said and did to make your life hell these past 3 months." Before Maya could respond, The medevac helicopters roared into the valley, two Black Hawks with red crosses on their sides. They flared hard and landed on the road, medics jumping out before the wheels fully touched down. The next 10 minutes were organized chaos. The most critical patients were loaded first: Donnelly, two others with severe shrapnel wounds, and Lieutenant Bradshaw. The medics worked with practiced efficiency, starting IVs, administering pain medication, stabilizing injuries for transport. Maya helped carry Donnelly to the helicopter. As they loaded him onto the bird, he grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," he mouthed, unable to speak over the rotor noise. She nodded, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. "Not here, not now." The Black Hawks lifted off, banking hard to gain altitude before heading south toward the field hospital at Bagram. Maya watched them go, carrying broken men who'd been whole an hour ago. "Corporal Reeves." She turned. Martinez stood there, the same Martinez who'd coined her nickname, who'd made her life miserable with 1,000 small cruelties. His face was pale under the blood and dirt, his eyes red-rimmed. He stopped, struggling with words. "That shot you made, the first one, I saw it through my binos, saw that commander go down. We were about to get overrun and you just," he swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for calling you anchor for all of it." Maya looked at him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to tell him exactly where he could shove his apology. But another part, the part her father had raised, understood that combat changed people, that admitting fault took courage. "We all make mistakes, Martinez," she said finally. "What matters is what we do after." He nodded, relief flooding his face, and extended his hand. She shook it. Around them, the surviving soldiers were preparing to move. The Apache would provide cover while they transferred supplies to the damaged but mobile vehicles and began the journey back to Fob Phoenix. They'd failed to reach Fob Keating, but they'd survived. Against the odds, despite the perfect ambush, they'd survived. And everyone knew why. Dawson's voice carried across the kill zone. "Listen up. We're Oscar Mike in 5 minutes, but before we move, I want everyone to understand something." He looked directly at Maya. "Corporal Reeves saw this ambush coming. She warned us at the briefing. We didn't listen. That's on me, and I'll answer for it. But when it mattered, when we were dying in this valley, she made the shots that saved our lives." 20 pairs of eyes turned to Maya. Some looked grateful. Some looked ashamed. All of them looked at her differently than they had that morning. "From this moment forward," Dawson continued, "Reeves is no longer anchor." He paused. "Her new call sign is Guardian Angel. And if anyone has a problem with that, you can take it up with me personally." Silence. Then Martinez started clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire unit was applauding, the sound echoing off the ridgelines where minutes before, bullets had flown. Maya stood there, covered in blood that wasn't hers, holding a rifle that had just killed 5 men, and felt something break inside her, something that had been holding her together through sheer force of will. She turned away so they wouldn't see her cry. 6 months later, Maya stood in Section 47 of Riverside Cemetery in Dayton, Ohio, autumn leaves crunching under her combat boots. The October wind carried the smell of rain and dying grass, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed its monotonous song. Her father's headstone was simple gray granite with an eagle, globe, and anchor etched above his name. Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Reeves, USMC, 1975-2014. She'd been back in the States for 2 weeks, but this was her first visit to the cemetery. She'd needed time to decompress, time to process, time to figure out what she wanted to say to the man who'd set her on this path. Maya wore her dress uniform, the bronze star with valor pinned above her left breast pocket, alongside her combat action badge and marksmanship medals. The decorations felt heavy, not with physical weight, but with everything they represented. The official citation had been read at Fob Phoenix with full honors for exceptionally valorous actions during combat operations against enemy forces in Tangi Valley, Afghanistan. Corporal Reeves' precision fire under extreme duress eliminated 5 enemy combatants, broke a coordinated ambush, and saved 14 American lives. 14 lives, the number haunted her dreams. So did the 5 she'd taken. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, kneeling to brush fallen leaves from the base of the headstone. "I finally understand what you meant, about courage not being the absence of fear." The wind picked up, scattering more leaves across the perfectly maintained cemetery lawn. Maya closed her eyes and let herself remember that morning in Tangi Valley, not the sanitized version she'd told the investigators, or the heroic version the news crews wanted to hear, but the truth. The truth was that she'd been terrified, that her hands had shaken, that she'd wanted to curl up behind that truck tire and disappear. The truth was that Specialist Chen's blood had soaked through her uniform, that Private Donnelly's wheezing breath still echoed in her nightmares, that she could still see the Taliban commander's face through her scope in the instant before she'd taken his life. The truth was that killing someone, even to save others, even when it was necessary and right, and just, it still changed you in ways that couldn't be unchanged. "I killed 5 men that day," Maya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 human beings who probably had families, who had mothers and children and people who loved them. I know they were trying to kill us. I know I did the right thing, but it still hurts, Dad. Is that normal? Did you feel this way?" The wind offered no answer, but Maya knew what her father would have said. She'd heard his words often enough in counseling sessions at the VA hospital, where she'd been going twice a week since returning home. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, herself an Iraq veteran, had told her that feeling the weight of taking a life was proof of her humanity, not weakness. "The day it doesn't bother you," Dr. Morrison had said, "that's when you should worry." Footsteps approached from behind. Maya didn't turn around. She'd heard that particular gait before, the slight drag of the left foot that came from taking shrapnel to the leg. "Thought I might find you here," Sergeant Dawson said, stopping beside her. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a fleece jacket, though he stood with military bearing that no amount of civilian clothing could hide. "Your mom said you'd driven out this morning." "You talked to my mom." Maya stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Called to check on you. She invited me over for dinner tonight, said you've been quiet since you got back." Dawson's eyes went to the headstone, reading the inscription. "Marine, huh? That explains a lot." "He taught me everything," Maya said. "How to shoot, how to read terrain, how to—" she trailed off, her throat tight. "How to be better than I thought I could be." "He'd be proud of you." Dawson pulled something from his jacket pocket, a photograph, worn at the edges from handling. "I wanted to show you something." Maya took the photo. It showed Private Donnelly in a hospital bed at Walter Reed Medical Center, his chest wrapped in bandages but his eyes clear and alive. He was giving a thumbs up to the camera, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Written across the bottom in marker, "Thanks to my guardian angel, Donnelly." "He's going to make it," Dawson said. "Full recovery expected. Doctors said if you hadn't applied that chest seal when you did, he'd have died before the medevac arrived." He paused. "That's one of the 14, Maya. 14 soldiers who went home to their families because you refused to miss." Maya stared at the photo, her vision blurring with tears she'd been holding back for months. "I keep thinking about the ones I killed instead of the ones I saved." "I know. I did the same thing after my first firefight in Fallujah." Dawson's voice was gentle, understanding. "It's easier to focus on the taking because it feels like something we did wrong, something we should feel guilty about. But saving lives, that's harder to accept because it means accepting that we're capable of good even in the worst circumstances." "The Army offered me a position as a sniper instructor," Maya said, not looking up from Donnelly's photo. "Full-time active duty at Fort Benning. They said I could help train the next generation of snipers, use what I learned in combat to make other soldiers better." "That's incredible. You'd be amazing at it." "I turned it down." Dawson's eyebrows rose. Why? Maya handed back the photo and turned to face him fully. Because I realized something in Afghanistan. I'm good at killing people, really good apparently, but I don't want that to be my purpose. I don't want to be defined by the worst day of my life, even if it was also somehow the best day. She took a breath. I'm going back to school. Psychology degree, focus on counseling. I want to help soldiers deal with what they've experienced, what they've done, who they've become. Because of what you're going through now, Dawson said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Because I know what it's like to carry weight that other people can't see, to be drowning while everyone's congratulating you for swimming. Maya looked back at her father's grave. Dad used to say that the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break and then figure out how to put themselves back together differently. Dawson nodded slowly. You know the unit wants to stay in touch, right? Martinez emails me every week asking if you're okay. Cooper and William started a group chat. We're planning a reunion next spring. Everyone who was in that convoy. Donnelly will be there. He wants to meet you properly when he's not bleeding out. The image made Maya smile despite herself. I'd like that. I need to stop hiding from what happened and start integrating it into who I am. Smart, Dawson checked his watch. Your mom said dinner's at 6. I should probably head over, help her set up. You coming? In a bit, I need a few more minutes here. Dawson squeezed her shoulder, the same gesture he'd used in the kill zone, but it meant something different now. Respect instead of desperation. Connection instead of relief. For what it's worth, Maya, you're the bravest soldier I've ever served with. Not because of what you did in that valley, but because you're brave enough to admit that it changed you. He walked away, leaves crunching under his feet, leaving Maya alone with her father's memory and her own thoughts. She knelt again, pressing her palm flat against the cold granite. I'm going to be okay, Dad. It's going to take time and it's going to be hard, but I'm going to figure out how to carry this, how to honor what I did without letting it destroy me. She stood, brushing away tears she no longer felt ashamed of crying. I love you, and thank you for teaching me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and pulling the trigger anyway. As Maya walked back to her car, she passed another grave, a fresh one with flowers still bright and new. The headstone read, Specialist James Chen, U.S. Army, 1995-2025. She stopped, stood at attention, and saluted crisply. I'm sorry I couldn't save you too, she whispered. But she'd saved 14 others. And maybe, with time and work and healing, she'd learned to let that be enough. The October wind carried the sound of distant traffic, children playing in a nearby park, life continuing in all its messy, complicated beauty. Maya Reeves, soldier, sniper, survivor, got in her car and drove toward her mother's house, toward dinner with old friends, toward a future she was finally ready to build. She wasn't Anchor anymore. She wasn't even guardian angel. She was just Maya, figuring out how to be human again. And that she was learning was the bravest thing of all.
Due coglioni. Non mi piace questo livello, eh? Non è esattamente il mio preferito. Non è esattamente il mio preferito questo, devo dire. Ma sì, è difficile, però è un po' troppo intricato, cioè si è persa quella bellezza della semplicità del gioco. Inizia a essere un po' troppa roba. È rimasto sopra, sì? No, aspetta! Ah, ma può passare lì, sono io che non ci posso passare, ok? Non sto capendo, aspetta. Non lo puoi fermare per piacere, stai fermo. Ah, ma non è all'altezza giusta? Oh sì, sì, devo metterlo là però. Sì, va messo di lì. Quindi andrebbe fatto andare ancora un po'. Mamma mia che casino però sto livello, Cristo santo. Ho capito, ma io devo andarci là sopra però adesso. Cioè tutto questo io lo devo fare da sopra? Un po' too much. Lo devo fare da là sopra io adesso questo, giusto?